Hello, I'm doing a video here on how to go about fixing a crack in your basement foundation wall. In my case, I have two cracks that formed on opposite sides of the basement. In each case, during uh, a spring thaw, the melting snow would leak in through the cracks on both sides and would begin to pool at the base on the floor. Um, It doesn't happen all the time, but during a heavy snowfall and a quick melt, that it tends to happen. My solution was to use a polyurethane foam injection. It's a good solution for cracks which are not too large or not too wide, and enables you to inject the foam that forms in between the crack, hardens, and then basically prevents water from coming into the crack. In my case, I purchased a brand called Sika, and within the little kit, it contains the caulking tube of the foam injection, a couple of long nozzles, a small pack of quick dry cement, and I think it was about 20 or so small plastic pipettes, which are used to attach to the crack for injecting the foam. For this project, you'll need a few tools, a small trowel, a water spray bottle, a chisel and hammer, or perhaps a power chisel if you have one, a metal brush, air spray, a caulking gun, and of course, additional tools that you may need to expose the crack. If your wall is finished or your floors are finished, then you may need to have the right tools in order to cut through drywall or cut through the stud in order to expose the crack. First thing is you'll need to identify where the crack is. Of course, if your basement is not finished, then you can clearly visibly see where the crack is. But if there's some insulation or drywalling in your basement, then you'll have to identify where the leaks are coming in as soon as it happens, so you get the general location of where the crack is. If you wait too long for the water to pool, it may be difficult to identify exactly where the crack is because it could be a large area, as it was in my case. You can also look at where water stains might be left behind if there was a leak and then it dried. So that might help you identify where the leak is as well, where the crack is as well. Once you've exposed the entire crack, the real work now begins with the injection process. And essentially that is to widen the crack first so that you can get the foam into the crack, clean out the crack to make sure all the debris is removed, attach pipettes along the path of the crack, plaster the crack so that the foam will not escape, and then you begin to inject the foam from the base up, from the bottom up, so that you can fill the entire crack with foam. And then you let it dry, and then you can remove the pipettes and sand down the plaster if needed, if it's going to be an exposed wall. If it's behind drywall and insulation, then it doesn't really matter. You can leave it as is. So the first step is to use a chisel and hammer or use a power chisel, and then go along the full length of the crack to widen the opening. Next, use a wire brush to brush along the surface of the crack so that it's clean and there's no calcium buildup or debris along the edge of the crack, as you're going to be using plaster to cover it at some point. Now using a air spray or air from a compressor, I use the ball needle in my air compressor in order to get in between the crack, in order to blow out the debris that might have accumulated as a result of all the chiseling process. I want to make sure that the crack is as clean as possible. The kit itself recommends attaching the pipettes while you're plastering the crack. I found it actually to be easier to break out this step by using a glue gun to attach the pipettes at the marked locations before the plastering process. This way you can securely attach the pipettes in the proper locations and then do the plastering afterwards. Now that the pipettes are all attached securely against the crack, you can now use the quick dry cement to cover over the crack and to plaster around the pipettes. I found the best approach here is to actually have two people do this step, as one person can mix small quantities of quick dry cement while the other person applies it to the crack itself. Make sure to use plenty of water to spray along the crack so that the quick dry cement adheres properly. If it's too dry in the wall, then it won't attach properly and it won't be secure enough. The kit suggests using a trowel to apply the plaster along the crack and around the pipettes. I found this a little bit difficult to do as the pipettes are rather smooth and the plaster sometimes would slide off the pipette, so it was a bit difficult to do. So then I found it easier really just to use my hands and grab small pieces of the plaster and then just form it around the pipettes and along the crack. After the plastering is complete, I believe the recommendation is a few hours for it to thoroughly dry. Since I wasn't in a hurry, I actually let it dry overnight and came back to work on the next step the next day. Once the plaster work is dry, I found it to be useful to take a spray bottle of water and inject it into the pipettes, working from the bottom up and observing whether or not there's any water leaking out of any of the plaster. If there is any leakage, mix up additional plaster, cement, and fill in those cracks where the leak is occurring. If you don't do this, when it comes time to the foam injection, it will come out of those cracks. So having a good seal up the full length of the crack is very important. Once again, if you've done any additional plastering, make sure that everything is dry before you move on to the next step. Now we're ready for the foam injection. Make sure to wear gloves for this step. The liquid is actually very sticky and it's very difficult to wash off your hands. You'll now need to have a few things ready and handy. First, the caulking gun with the nozzle attached. You need the water bottle ready to spray water into the crack. And you need to have the plugs for the pipettes handy. Start from the bottom pipette and work your way upward. Using your water bottle, spray into the first pipette, making sure to fully drench the inside of the crack. Now align the caulking gun nozzle with the pipette and gently squeeze 2 times, leaving the nozzle still aligned with the pipette. Wait a good 20 seconds or so until you see foam coming out of the next level pipette. Then you know that the void space between the 2 pipettes is fully engulfed with the foam. Once you observe foam coming out of the next level pipette, remove your caulking gun nozzle and plug it into that next level pipette, and immediately use one of the plugs to plug the lower level pipette. Now you're ready to repeat the process at the next level pipette, spraying water first into the crack, then to squeeze the injector, watch the foam protruding from the next level pipette, move the caulking gun into the next level and plugging the bottom, and repeat this process all the way up till you reach the top. Once you've completed this process all the way to the top, it's now just a matter of waiting for the foam to dry and cure. I let it dry overnight to make sure that it's thoroughly hardened. Once the foam is fully dry, the job is essentially done. Your seal is complete and you should not get any more water leakage. If your crack is behind drywall, you can essentially leave everything as is, reinstall the insulation, and redo your drywall. However, I found it useful to use a Dremel tool and cut off the pipettes so that it'd be easier to install the carbon paper and insulation. If it's an exposed wall, then you'll want to pry off the pipettes and the plastering that you had done to cover off the crack temporarily, and then sand it down and paint as you need to. This won't damage the foam, which is already hardened inside the crack, and should prevent water from coming in the future. I hope you found this video helpful. I've used this injection process on 2 cracks in my basement, and I have not seen leaks come back.